Ready? Play.
Welcome back to another episode of Painting Lines. Last week we covered the first half of Indian Wells, and today we'll be breaking down the second week. Apologies for my audio. I am traveling out of the country right now, so don't have my mic, but let's jump right in. Aiden, what were your thoughts of the second week? Do you think that the fact like guys like Djokovic, Zverev, Rublev, FAA, the fact that they weren't in it anymore, and we saw guys like Sport, Sarundalo, Nakashima, like relatively new faces, made it less interesting, or did you not really notice much of a difference?
I think it provided a good change of pace overall because you don't want to see the same guys in every tournament over and over again, or there'll never be any change in the sport. And it did add some volatility in the tournament, some uncertainty about how they were going to do, especially in those later rounds. But by the time we rolled around to the semifinals, none of them were left, and it kind of got back to almost a normality. There was still some surprising guys, I think, at that stage, but it wasn't those crazy guys like Greek Sports or Rundalo that nobody saw coming going into the tournament.
Yeah, I agree. Still, when you say not crazy names, because they're good players, Draper, Runa, but guys that we just didn't really see expecting making it to the finals.
Exactly, exactly.
All right, so let's just kick off with the body here. So I would say that the week started off pretty routine. The round of 32 wrapped up, all the favorites won. The best match there was Dimitrov beating Monfils in a third set breaker, and I can elaborate that a little more later on.
Oh, because was it your match of the week?
It was, yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I mean, all I want to say about this one was kind of just like a battle of the old dogs, 33-year-old versus 38-year-old. So kind of a blast from the past here.
Yeah, it was. And then we got into the round of 16 where things got pretty interesting here. This is where all the Americans just started dropping like flies. Like Fritz loses to Draper. I was shocked for this one because Fritz was plus 100, and I was telling everyone and their mothers to take this bet because I was so confident in Fritz. And it's Indian Wells too. It's essentially his home tournament. He's won it before, so I was very shocked here.
Yeah, I think when you look at that line, it does kind of reflect, though, the sentiment of Draper is a rising star. We had him as a guy that was primed for a breakout in our 2024 awards. Uh, I also think it reflects the fact that Fritz did lose to Draper in Paris last year. And also the fact that Fritz hasn't played that great in 2025 so far. Fritz had a great end to 2024. He made the final of the US Open and the final of the ATP finals. But in 2025, hasn't really done anything that spectacular. And I think probably the betting odds reflected that, and it was reflected in the result of the match.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Maybe he needs to lay off the video games and junk food here for a sec.
Yeah, he still hasn't recovered from that binge he had after the US Open.
Yeah, exactly. And then another American, Tommy Paul, he loses to Medvedev, where Medvedev bagels him in the second set, which I feel like I've never seen Tommy Paul get bageled.
Yeah, I mean, this was a match where I thought it was going to be a great match. I thought this was primed to be one of the premier matches of the whole tournament, and it comes out and kind of gets dominated by Medvedev.
Yeah, I do agree. This was supposed to be slated as one of the premier matches. It was my bet of the week, which I didn't really have a good betting week here because this one did not hit either. And yeah, it was the semifinal last year, so everyone was expecting a lot more.
I remember last week we talked about the freshness aspect with Medvedev coming off of a uh, walkover over Mickelson, and I think that may have played a role just coming out and being able to play just with tons of energy in the second set and having no risk of running out, which I feel like is a real risk with Medvedev's style of play, is that he can run out of energy because he plays such a grindy style.
Yeah, definitely, and that's where it starts to affect him in the slams because you're playing best out of five, not best out of three, and then all of a sudden he makes it to the semis of the finals, and he's got the most court time out of any other player.
I think it also just is kind of that imbalance of fatigue. Like if one player goes in more fresh, they're going to have that advantage. Whereas if you both go in, you've both played four full matches or three full matches, then it changes kind of the dynamic in the match.
Yeah, another thing I want to bring up here too is remember he had food poisoning in Mexico in Acapulco a couple weeks ago. So I feel like that still takes a while to recover from. Like your body loses all types of nutrients, electrolytes, and like even though you may not be sick anymore, your body's still probably adapting, getting back to normal.
Yeah, just recovering.
I should have seen that in the bet. Should have been one of my analysis.
Yeah, the ghost of the revenge. What is it?
Yeah, Montezuma's
Yeah,
revenge.
the ghost of Montezuma's revenge.
Yeah, I'm here right now in Mexico, so I've been very careful not to drink the water.
Yeah, smart.
Uh, smart. Uh-huh. And then Jerome, he lost the feast. I wasn't really shocked here. This was pretty expected.
Yeah,
Thought he had a good run too. I mean, big wins against Popper and Rude. Those are guys that are technically better than them.
yeah. I mean, I think those are probably arguably big wins, right? I mean, especially on hard court against Rude. He's kind of a guy where we know that he can lose to pretty much anybody. When he's not
Mhm.
on clay, he's known for that inconsistency. And with Poprin, it's kind of like I remember talking to you about this one, and he is a guy where if you take away that Canada win from last year, he's ranked like somewhere in the mid 80s. So not a guy that's
Jeez.
ranked super highly outside of that one incredible performance he had, not to take that away from him, but
Mhm.
just when you consider all of his other results, it probably isn't that crazy of a win for Giron to beat him.
Yeah, no, I see that. It's just kind of, I think it's good for Jerome to beat guys that are ranked a lot higher than him.
Yeah, always good to beat the guy that's seeded or ranked higher.
Yeah, yeah. And then Nakashima, this one there's automatically going to be an American losing because Nakashima faced off against Shelton. He lost to him 6-7 and then 1-6. And I thought this was kind of one of those classic cases where they battled it out in the first set, like the breaker ended up being 8-6. And then the second set just kind of got away from him and he maybe I don't want to say gave up. I don't think he ever gave up, but I think it was just lack of motivation.
Yeah, I think this has happened to Nakashima before too. I think it was a similar situation when they played in the Australian Open this year. And I think it was a close early on, and then Shelton kind of just pulled away. I think it's just the fact that Shelton has so much firepower and he can dial it up in those big moments. And when you put so much into that first set and then lose it, if you gave it your all, it's really hard to keep hope going into that second set. Like I just gave everything I had in that first set, and now I have to come out here and try to win two more sets. So
Yeah, it's tough.
difficult. Yeah.
So that about wraps up the Americans here in round 16. And then for the rest of the draw, we have Greek Sport. He continues to win. Alcaraz absolutely dismantled Dimitrov 1-1. I know you probably felt a little bad for him watching that, huh?
Yeah. That was a bummer of a matchup. I mean, especially because Dimitrov had gotten a couple of nice wins
Yeah.
earlier on. I think it was kind of the after that Monfils match, he was a little tired and goes against Alcaraz, and Alcaraz is like, well, I'm not going to give you any rest here.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And then Runa and Tsitsipas, that I thought was geared up to be one of the best matches of the round because there's a little background here. Runa's 3-0 against him coming in. And I feel like these two are both pretty volatile at times, like on the court. So I wanted to see some chippiness. And ultimately, I thought like with Tsitsipas, winning a title or his first 500 title and kind of finding his new swagger that he'd be able to give him more of a fight and at least try to make this somewhat of a rivalry instead of a one-sided rivalry. But Runa ended up taking care of business, and I think he can officially say he owns him now, being 4-0. Like I don't know. What do you think? Do you think he owns Tsitsipas?
I mean, 4-0, hard to argue against, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I think that, but even then, like the head to head, you have to say someone like Sinner probably owns Medvedev right now too, even though the head to head's relatively close because he's won the
yeah.
last what like 25 matchups.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
But
Um,
I do think that yeah, it was definitely billed to be a great matchup, and I think it has to do with what you were saying that momentum that Tsitsipas had going into it. I still think though that he's not that same level of player some all the time when it's hard court. It's like Rude. There's just a level of inconsistency, so you can't always be certain that he's going to play at a super high level when it's not clay.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And we may not have seen a win out of him, but at least we did see kind of a little meltdown, which I thought was funny. So he got broken and he took a ball out of his pocket. And you know how like players just like launch it? Well, he just ripped it and it happened to hit Runa's back, like over on the bench, like just straight pop. And he got an unsportsmanlike conduct from that. And I thought Runa kind of would have been like in his face, like, yo, bro, why are you hitting my bag, huh? Like, but he
Wait,
just like didn't really give a shit.
what did he hit it at then? Like he just hit it like
Dude,
flat.
yeah, it was like probably 3 inches off the ground.
Well, I feel like that's
So
so risky. Like he could have just
I was
hit
gonna,
a person.
I know, and he always does that too. I feel like he's so reckless about ripping balls because I think he almost did that at Wimbledon too against Kyrgios. Like
Yeah, didn't he
almost
do that like
drilled someone.
yeah, I feel like he did it during the point though. He
Yeah.
was trying to just hit Kyrgios in that one.
Yeah, no, it was funny because like he was up at the net and he dumped a volley into the net and then he just turns around and starts walking towards the bench, takes the ball out, and like you know how the umpires
Yeah.
I guess tower is like right next to the benches too. So he started winding up and it looked like he was about to just kill the umpire, but then he kept it real low and just like hit it towards the seats and it nailed Runa's bag.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but yeah, and then to wrap up round 16, Deminar lost to Cerundolo. And I thought that this was kind of one of the scenarios where this new court at Indian Wells, I think if it's slower or whatnot, like whatever it was, it somehow benefited Cerundolo because I don't see any scenario where Deminar loses to Cerundolo on a hard court.
Yeah, I mean, it's also the situation where sometimes you watch a match like this where you see Deminar lose. I think honestly, Deminar is such an interesting guy to watch because it feels as though when he wins, you're like, dude, this guy's impossible to beat. You can't put him away. And
Mhm.
then he's also great at like setting up points a lot of the time when he's winning. But then you watch him lose and you're like, how does this guy ever win a match? Because it feels like sometimes he you're like, oh, he's just putting it back to the middle and he's just playing rally balls all the time. And so it's just a weird thing where even with Alcaraz, like when he loses, you're like, okay, he's just not making his shots today. Sometimes with Deminar, it's just like he isn't able to create opportunities for himself.
Yeah, another thing about Deminar, it's kind of interesting because he's usually so good at taking care of business against guys that are quote unquote worse than him, right? Like he's so good about beating people that aren't up to his level, but he's really bad at beating better guys. Like for example, Center Alcaraz, he has no chance, but then usually leading up to that, he usually beats guys that are kind of lower ranked.
Yeah. I mean, I maybe just got to give the respect to Sarandala. I think he's a very solid player.
Of course, of course. So, all right, let's get into the quarters now. And first matchup, we got some big serving lefties, Draper and Shelton. Draper ends up winning. And I thought this was going to be more of a serve fest, but I thought that there were a lot of like long, drawn out rallies for these guys. You know, like they were actually sitting in there and constructing points. Like I thought we were just going to see a bunch of aces, a bunch of quick 1-2s or serving volleys.
Yeah. I mean, two young guys, so hopefully we get to see this matchup a lot more in the future.
Yep. And then Medvedev, he won a thriller against Fils. I don't think there's much to say here. I'm assuming it's a match of the week.
Yeah, it's my match of the week. So stick around to the end to hear our analysis of that match.
Yeah, great match. And then Runa brings Greek Spore's run to an end. I thought, credit to Runa, but I thought Greek Spore had a great tournament. And honestly, just kind of, I'm pretty excited to see what he has in store for the rest of the year because I feel like he came on the scene here in the last like 3, 4 weeks.
Yeah, it definitely feels like he's made like a step up in terms of his performance quality. Not that he was bad last year. He definitely
Hmm.
had some tournaments. He was a guy last year where you saw his name in the tournament and you'd be like, okay, this guy's doing pretty well. but he would go out to a good player. He'd go out to an Alcaraz. He'd go out to a Zverev. But now it seems like he maybe has a little bit more momentum and can try to take that step up to the next level.
Yeah, he's not that young, is
I
do
don't
you
think
know?
so. I don't think he's a super young guy.
Yeah, it's weird. Or it's not weird, but different guys' ascensions. Like
100%.
he's been on tour for a bit now, and we didn't have him as one of the breakout players in 2025. So this is a good dark horse kind of guy.
100%.
And then, all right, semifinals. This one, poof. Draper beats Alcaraz, ends his chance to three-peat here. And this was funny because you and I were talking about it and like just kind of the scenarios here in the semis. And we kind of agreed, all right, like Alcaraz and Draper, this match might as well be the final because if Alcaraz wins, he'll easily beat Rune or Medvedev. But, Draper could give Alcaraz a run for his money. He had beaten him before, I think in Queen's Club in London. And then they did face off recently, but I think Draper had to retire. So it wasn't like it was a given that Alcaraz was going to win, and he didn't.
Yeah, 100%. I think that Draper was a guy where he was definitely a threat. And like we were talking about, it felt as though if Alcaraz won, he had that easy win over Rune or Medvedev because he's played both of those guys a bunch of times and he kind of knows how to beat them. Whereas with Draper, we were like, okay, he can maybe pull out a win over Alcaraz, and it was kind of funny because the Draper one actually did add some suspense to that final because it felt like there was actually a chance for Rune or Medvedev to beat him. And like you were mentioning, he also got that revenge for his loss in the Australian Open.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there were some good stats that you brought up too about the Alcaraz matches versus Dimitrov and Draper.
Yeah, I actually have those stats right here. So in the Alcaraz versus Dimitrov match, Alcaraz was, like we said, really dominant. He had a first serve percentage of 75%, hit 20 winners, and only had 14 unforced errors. And then you go in his match versus Draper, and his first serve percentage dropped down to 56%. He hit 26 winners, so six more winners, but had 30 unforced errors. And when you look at that, he had a massively less efficient first serve, and his winner percentage or his winner versus unforced error goes from a +6 to a -4. And what this says to me is that he probably was just hitting much more aggressive in all of his shots. And I think in this case, it just didn't really pay off where he wasn't able to get it done against Draper. And maybe that's reflected also in the score line of that match where it kind of went all over the place. Like he came out and Alcaraz got dominated in the first set and then turned it around and won 6-0 in the second. So it was kind of an odd and very volatile match.
Yeah, I know. And I feel like that's kind of a psychological win for Draper too, like before you even step out on the court or even I guess the adjustments that Alcaraz was trying to make. He's like, hey, this is a great opponent that I'm facing. I need to overextend myself and try to hit more winners than I normally would because if I don't try to end these points, then Draper will.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
and I think Alcaraz is kind of prone to overextending himself, like you were saying. I think that's a great way of putting it because he has the ability to make these crazy shots, but sometimes he goes for a little too much.
Definitely. And I think this emphasizes the point that we've been making over the last couple of weeks that these tournaments right now are really anybody's to win, like with Sinner on suspension. Because yes, you have Alcaraz and Djokovic, but Djokovic, come on, like first round exits, and then Alcaraz just, hit or miss.
100%. Yeah.
All right, then we got the other half of the draw. Rune beats Medvedev. I felt like this one was pretty one-sided. It seemed like Medvedev was always on the defensive, and Rune was dictating all the points. Medvedev was just trying to get them back. Like he just kind of felt pinned, and then he was hitting pretty weak, and Rune was getting short balls and finishing them. But Medvedev did have very nice passing shots. Like I feel like he does a great job of being on the defensive and then just turning it into offense. So, yeah, it was a good match. I thought Medvedev needed to play more aggressively, but I sound like a broken record saying this.
100%. I feel exactly the same way though. It's when you watch these Medvedev matches, you're especially if you don't catch the match and you only get to see the highlights, you feel like Medvedev is just always playing defense in every point. He's just keeping the ball in, playing a bunch of rally balls. And if a guy can step into it and put it away, he feels like there's nothing Medvedev can do other than maybe pull out a crazy passing shot.
Yeah.
He wins points because he's able to out rally his opponents because he's very good at his baseline game. But when Rune's playing well, he has the tools to out hit him, I guess, because Medvedev just doesn't have maybe that same level of aggression that he's had in the past, and doesn't he isn't playing at the same level he was in 2021. So it is just a kind of tough thing to see, but I think he's at a point where if a guy goes in there and plays their own game and doesn't get drawn into playing Medvedev's game, they have the ability to beat him.
Yeah, totally. Either way, this was a very much needed semifinal run for both these guys. I feel like they both really needed this. They kind of have been struggling the last call it a couple months. Runa a little longer too. But what do you think about Medvedev? Like as far as was this a tournament success for him?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think this is a little different tune than my normal feeling too. Is usually if a guy goes out and doesn't win the whole tournament, I'm kind of like unsuccessful
Yeah.
tournament. But I think honestly for Medvedev here, it does move him in the right direction because he was on a trajectory where he wasn't finding really any success, it felt like. And I think given that, getting to the semifinal at a major tournament like this is a big step in the right direction.
Totally. And I think it'll do a lot for his confidence too, because he's kind of one of those guys where he's not afraid to speak his mind too. Like him making the semis, I feel like he's gonna take this in stride. He's gonna be like, yeah, I mean, I'm into the semis. Like that's a objectively good run for pretty much anybody who's not like Alcaraz or Sinner, I feel like. But yeah, I think success. I think, you know, potentially could parlay this into a deep run in Miami. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, usually that's how it goes, right? A guy does well in Indian Wells. I feel like they're destined to do well in Miami.
Yeah, so let's jump right into the finals. Draper wins the biggest title of his career, and this was funny because remember my news of the week a couple weeks ago was him pulling out of Dubai, and I guess it paid off.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of clowned him. I was like, load
Yeah.
management, dude. But
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, definitely worked out in this situation.
Yeah, now look we look like idiots. But
Exactly.
yeah, the match was it was an interesting title because it wasn't like the scoreline wasn't great. I feel kind of bad for the fans who were there, but he came out hard. He broke Runa twice, came out to a 4-0 lead in the first set. And I think these were just nerves for Runa. I mean, he hasn't been in a final since or a Masters 1000 final since I think like 2023. So he's just he was kind of getting out there, felt jittery. And he wasn't able to find a groove. He lost his serve again early in the second set and then just couldn't battle back. So the line ended up being 6-2, 6-2.
Yeah, definitely a tough match for Runa. And I think, like you said, Draper just went out there and was like, I'm just going to play hard. I mean, obviously, he hasn't won a Masters 1000 before. So he was the one with less experience. But I think he just went out and was like, I'm just going to play. I won the big match already. He already beat Alcaraz. So he
Mhm.
kind of has less pressure maybe going into this match.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point right there. Um, if you were to guess the finals last week, who would you have said? Because these two were not on my radar.
I mean, I think Alcaraz would have been in it if I was making a guess. And I think the other person was so up for grabs, to be honest. Uh, any player in the top 10, I could have seen losing. Um, it's tough to say, really.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if that's a good thing really for the state of tennis that we were like, okay, Alcaraz and some other guy, because normally a couple like 5 months ago you might have been like, okay, Alcaraz Medvedev, but
Yeah.
Medvedev hasn't been playing like that. Zverev has been playing kind of poor on hard court since the Australian Open, uh, or just overall since the Australian Open rather. Fritz, you don't really think he's going to make the final. I mean, he just doesn't really do that all the time. It would have been a tough ask, let's say.
Oh, totally. I was gonna say Tommy Paul. I was really thinking like maybe this would be his breakout because I don't know. I just get really bullish on Americans on in big American tournaments, I think.
100%.
Yeah. Which probably isn't the right way to look at it. You know, it's kind of emotional too, but I was thinking he was primed up for this.
Yeah. All in all, pretty interesting tournament, I think. My question here though is, what are your thoughts on the landscape of tennis like after this tournament going into Miami? Like we look at guys like Zverev and Djokovic. How do we think they're going to do? How do you think these guys that did play well here, Rune, Medvedev, Draper, are going to go and do in Miami as well?
Yeah, this is interesting. I feel like the guys who weren't expected to do well at Indian Wells, I don't know if they'll do well at Miami just because that effect of like making a deep run, maybe they're fatigued. I don't see it being consistent, but I do think on the other hand, like someone like Zverev will go deep in Miami. I think he's pissed off right now, and I think he's going to start taking it out. Djokovic, I think he'll win a couple rounds. I think Alcaraz, he plays very well in Miami, so I could see him doing well. And I'm gonna put a premium on all the Latin players here because Miami is pretty much like playing in Latin America. They're like let me get like Jari, Fonseca. I think all the Argentinians will do well. Um, Alcaraz, dude. Whenever I go to the Miami Open, the crowd is insane for Alcaraz.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alcaraz going into Miami, like just as I just talked about with Indian Wells, it feels like it's who's going to be in the final. You'd be like Alcaraz feels like the favorite, and
Mhm.
then some other person. But I do agree what you said about Zverev. I think for him, he's not only pissed about losing the first round, but also he got 2 weeks off essentially,
Mhm.
or a week and
Yeah,
a half off from after that loss. Whereas other guys that actually did play really well in that first tournament, or in Indian Wells rather, had to play a week of tennis in between.
yeah. Yeah, and I hate to say this about Draper because maybe his load management is still paying off, but last year in Miami, he looked like he couldn't even be out there for a full match. So I'm a little worried about him with the conditions because Miami is no joke. Like Indian Wells is hot, but at least it cools off in the evening and it's kind of that dry heat. Whereas Miami, it is hot, humid, sticky, just gross out there. Like
Yeah.
he's gonna be dripping all over the court.
Yeah, we saw what's happened to him in like Australia in the
Yep.
past. So,
Yep, exactly. What about you? What are your thoughts going into Miami?
like I said, I think it's Alcaraz's tournament to win,
Hmm.
and I think Zverev has a chance. Djokovic doesn't feel like a real legitimate threat anymore, and then the guys that played well, it's just a question of how does the conditions and the tiredness and fatigue from this tournament play into it.
Yeah, totally. So just kind of going back to your experience at Indian Wells, was this a tournament that you could see yourself like wanting to go back every year, or were you like, all right, this is cool, I'll check it off my bucket list, but you know, I'm not itching to get back there.
I definitely want to check it out again. I think that I would want to go maybe earlier in the tournament. Actually, I think I went on the day that maybe was like the most populated because it was a Saturday, and maybe if I went an earlier round, maybe get to catch more matches on those outer courts with more, I guess, high level guys. Not that I didn't get to see some great matches, but I think just when it's a little bit less busy, we'll just say.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely want to get out there at some point. And Miami, I think this is the first year in like 4 or 5 years I'm not going to be able to go, so I'm kind of bummed out about it.
Yeah, kind of a bummer. But
Yeah,
alrighty, you ready to hop into segments here?
yeah, let's do it.
Hey guys, before we jump in, we have some exciting news. We recently partnered with TruePro. They're a great place to buy strings, grips, and tennis apparel. Use discount code Painting Lines, that's one word, for 20% off store wide. You can find the link in our bio.
Sounds good. What's new in tennis? What'd you see this week?
Dude, I saw something hilarious. So, Bublik and Motet. got into it at the Phoenix Challenger, and just kind of note aside, this Phoenix Challenger was stacked because all the people who lost early in Indian Wells would just go to Phoenix and play this Challenger. So I feel like you had a lot of big names in it. And but anyway, back to the news of the week. So it was a super contentious match to begin with. At one point, Bublik was about to serve, and Mutet just goes like, "I'm not ready," and Bublik goes, "I don't give a shit." And then everyone in the crowd just started like bursting out laughing. And then at the end of the match, after they like shook hands and stuff, they still were arguing. And Bublik, you could just hear him say like, "Let's step outside and fight. You want to go fight? Let's go outside." Like he was trying to fight Mutet, and the umpire had to get down, like separate them. And Gil Gross was actually commentating it, and he was funny because after the match, like it was kind of one of those things where the broadcast was still going, and he's just there like, "Oh, the umpire's separating them. We could see Bublik. He's still got some words for Mutet, man. These guys are jarring right now." Like it was funny to hear him on that because like it's pretty spontaneous to be broadcasting and like have to commentate on a fight in tennis because that's
Potential
not
fight.
something, yeah, because that's not something you normally see. But another thing he said, he made a joke at the end of the match where this match probably broke the record for the most drop shots in a single match.
Yeah, you get a couple guys just throwing at a bunch of junk balls, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
But speaking of Phoenix, my news of the week is actually just based on around the winner. Fonseca ended up taking the title here, and he's actually the second youngest South America to get to three challenger titles behind only Delpo. So good company to be in, and it's funny because he actually lost to Draper at Indian Wells and then rebounded, won a title, and then obviously Draper went on to win the title as well. So not a bad guy to lose to, I guess, and shows that his momentum is very solid, especially because he beat very solid guys along the way to win this one. He beat Struff, he beat Nishikori, and then beat Bublik in the final. So very solid there. Ended up moving up 20 ranking spots. Now is at a world number 60. So that's a big step from him. And going into Miami this week, he actually plays fellow youngster Lerner Tien. So it's an exciting match to watch. And I just want to say he's living up to the hype so far this year.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's really exciting. He's played him what, twice in the next gen finals? Beat him
Yeah, played
twice.
him twice, beat him twice. So
Once in the finals,
I think I
yeah.
know who I would probably bet on here.
Yeah. Speaking of bets.
Yeah. Speaking of bets, no bets this week. Uh
Yeah.
just because they haven't really come out yet for Miami.
hmm So
And
match of the
then
week.
yeah, sounds good. Who'd you go for in match of the week?
As I mentioned before, I went with Dimitrov. He edges past Monfils, and this whole match just felt like a highlight reel because there are all these crazy points. And like at one point, Dimitrov even had this point where he won it from the ground, like it was a cat and mouse point up at the net, and then Dimitrov's momentum had him going one way, but the ball went the other. So he like slipped or he cut and he's on the ground and then he dove and still hit the winner. So that was awesome to see. Like Monfils even gave him the thumbs up. Dimitrov acknowledged it too. And then another component of this match that I liked watching was it's just so aesthetically pleasing. Like you have Monfils's fluidity and like his loose motion of his forehand. He looks so nonchalant out there. And then Dimitrov's got the 1-E. So it's just like beautiful tennis. And these two like you said, the battle of the old dogs. I felt like you were kind of getting a glimpse into what tennis was 10 years ago. Like that type of tennis was a little different than right now, just kind of that pure power. So, into the actual match, it was a very tight first set. Dimitrov took it in a tiebreaker. Monfils battled back to send it to a decider, but ultimately Dimitrov did win the third set in a tiebreaker as well. Did not disappoint. The whole match was just great. It was great, and it even ended here with Dimitrov. Like after the last point, he didn't even celebrate. I feel like in a third set tiebreaker, when you win the last point, there's such a like a sign of relief where players usually like scream or launch a ball into the crowd or like do something. Dimitrov kept it like calm, cool, collective, and didn't even smile until he like embraced Monfils at the net and they gave each other a big hug and then just kind of laughed and joked around. But I feel like that's a true testament to Dimitrov's respect for his opponent. Like there was no need to just scream or roar. Like I think he did it the most classy way possible.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, I think because these guys came from a generation before this one, they kind of have a different vibe about them, and that vibe is kind of more calm and it's more composed. It's almost like the shadow of Federer impacting these guys, and I think it's just that they bring that to their matches. Whereas these younger guys, it's much more explosive. It's much more hit the crap out of the ball and have these big emotions. It's almost like a lot of the new generation is almost like the shadow of Alcaraz, where
Yeah, yeah.
that's the guy that's like kind of guiding how tennis is. And the previous generation, it was kind of guided by Federer.
Yeah, no, totally. That's a great comparison. What was your match of the week?
Mine, like I said as well, Medvedev surviving versus Fils. Honestly, I think first two sets were great, but really it felt like it was just set of the week in this one because Medvedev took the first set and then Fils took the second, and Fils had all the momentum in the after that second set. He broke him early, and then at the end of the second set, he actually broke him again to win and close out the second. But let's just break down this third set. So it started out two games held to love. So domination early on. And then at 1-1, it was just a battle, multiple deuces. And Medvedev eventually breaks through, gets a break against Fils, and then couldn't consolidate. Immediately gives it back, actually with a pretty bad error on the break point. And the commentator said, like, Fils is now infused with energy, and he was hitting harder. He was celebrating more. He had the crowd on his side, and he broke Medvedev again to go up 4-2. And then I think the critical moment in the set was when Fils tried to serve and volley at 30-40 in the next game. And like you said, Medvedev very good with those passing shots. He actually had a really nice passing shot up the line at love 15 in this game as well. But at 30-40, Fils serves, tries to come in for that serve and volley, and Medvedev makes this great cross-court return, passing the approaching Fils, ends up taking that break back. They battle out the rest of the set, goes to a tiebreak, very tight tiebreak. Fils like barely missed a shot at 7-7, which gave Medvedev a second match point. And then at 7-8, he served and volleyed again and kind of got caught off guard by Medvedev getting his first volley. And it kind of went to Fis's body. He tried to get it back and ended up putting the volley long. And Medvedev a crazy reaction, really excited for him. And I just think it was an exciting match to watch, especially with all those momentum swings. And it was exciting, especially when you're rooting for the guy that ended up winning. Uh, Also, I just wanted to bring up some interesting match stats here. Feast came to the net, what feels like a lot, 36 times, and was a very successful strategy against Medvedev. I think it feels like a lot, especially when you consider the fact that Medvedev only came to the net 3 times. And then Medvedev still cannot convert on those break points. He was 3 of 11 on break points converted. So I feel like if he can just convert a few more times, that's probably going to be pretty massive for him. And then finally, Fils actually won more often off of Medvedev's first serve than off of his second one, which is kind of a weird one. But I wonder if that has to do with the fact that when Medvedev makes his first serve, he's maybe not as far back. Like he has less time to get ready and get into the rally. But just a weird one to see. Fils won 37% of the time off Medvedev's first serve and only 26% of the time off his second serve.
Whoa, that is an interesting stat.
Uh,
That's pretty crazy.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I like you were saying about Medvedev's reaction after, because I feel like he usually keeps it pretty calm. Like maybe he'll like do one of these to the crowd or like put his hand up to his ear, that type of thing. But I saw him like jumping around, like he looked like a little kid on Christmas. Super
100%.
excited.
So it kind of shows how much of a big deal it was for him to make it back to the semifinal.
Totally. Those third set tiebreakers too. They'll turn you into a man.
Exactly.
All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.